into these 5 talks. Now, he took things from documents such as the Catholic School, the Religious Dimension of Education, Gravissimum, Educationis, and others, and was really able to distill these down into these 5 marks, which are first, inspired by a supernatural vision; second, founded on a Christian anthropology; third, animated by communion and community; fourth, imbued with a Catholic worldview; and fifth, sustained by the witness of teaching. Now, before we get into contemplating that fourth one, I do want to, invite you, if you have a comment or you have a question, to please put that in the question box that will be sent over and visible to me should we have time at the end of the talk. The talk does conclude at 12:50, but if there is time, I'd certainly love to engage with questions. And if you have follow-ups, I'm certainly happy to engage offline as well. So taking a look at this mark, imbued with the Catholic worldview, I chose to focus on it because I think it's the one essential mark that really brings in threads from all of the others. And in the first part of today's session, I'd like to just reflect on the meaning as defined by Archbishop Miller and flesh out some of the concepts of what we mean by a Catholic worldview. And in the second part of the talk, I'm going to share some slides and actually illustrate how these principles look in practice in a Catholic school. So, quick note on my own personal experience. About 12 years ago, I was principal of a parochial school, St. Jerome in Hyattsville, Maryland, and I was in my first year, and the school was on the verge of closure due to declining enrollment, mounting debt, and an unclear vision for a path forward. Part of the work that we did in sort of revising and restoring that school to health was to be as intentional as we could about integrating the church's understanding of education, the church's vast educational tradition in the school. And the document, the Holy See's teaching on Catholic schools, was very much a roadmap for me, for which I am truly grateful. I'm happy to report that that school survived, is very much alive today, has 408 students enrolled, regularly receives more than 200 applicants in a given year, and has wait lists. So it certainly it gratifies me to see it thriving. So part of what I'm doing today is just sharing my own experience, my hope with you as you work to continue to sustain Catholic education in your schools. So let's break this down by looking at the phrase Catholic worldview. We'll look at the Catholic piece first. Here we understand Catholic to mean the magisterial understanding of the nature and essence and purpose of things, in this case, of education. We understand this in light of the 2 most seismic events in all of history: the incarnation of Christ and the Paschal mystery of Christ. Now, in the incarnation, which is sort of this explosive center of human history, we've marked time by it. We understand the world through it. The pre-Christian world is even understood in anticipation of the revealed Christ, and all that came from it is certainly understood in light of it. In taking on human flesh, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, is born into the world, becomes like us in all things but sin, thus elevating human nature and experience, and certainly making them worthy of our attention and focus. Secondly, the Paschal mystery, which we're quite in the middle of celebrating right now, the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. In this, the risen Christ makes all things new. Because he defeats death, all of creation becomes elevated and has new meaning. This, of course, dictates to some degree the way that we look at the world around us. Now, another way to understand the word Catholic is in its own etymology, its definition, which is universal. So it's an expression of the church's centuries-old practice of taking up into herself what is true and good and beautiful. It's inclusive of peoples and cultures and times. So it certainly is a very large and embrace of Mother Church that we're looking at when we speak about Catholic. Now, the concept of a worldview, of course, is really how we see things, the lenses. So I offered you 2, the incarnation, the Paschal mystery, as a Catholic way of sort of seeing the world. But it also stands to reason that, we're talking about schools. Schools are institutions. Institutions really don't have worldviews. Only people can have worldviews. So we want to be conscious that our faculty and staff actually weave the tapestry of this Catholic understanding of the world by adopting it and continually growing in it themselves. So again, speaking to the importance of continued formation for all of us. Now, Archbishop Miller calls Catholic schools privileged places which foster the formation of the whole person. I think all of us who have been involved in Catholic education would agree with that. We see it. It's certainly what we have witnessed and done in our own schools. And here the Archbishop says Catholicism, in order to complete this integral formation, must permeate not just religion class or catechism or liturgy, but every single substantial part of our program, our disciplines, our other programs. Catholicism should have a substantial presence. So if a visitor were to drop in on a class other than religion, would that class look distinctly different from other schools? And that's a question I think that can guide us in taking a look at our own classrooms and schools. Now, does this mean that we need to include religious content in everything we do? No. We're not saying that the only thing you can read is Lives of the Saints or scripture, or your math problems have to be 3 apostles met 2 apostles on the way, and how many apostles? No, of course not. It really does mean seeing all of these things that we teach through these new eyes of faith and finding, what is so new and so compelling about them. So the Archbishop proposes some concepts to help flesh out our understanding of this. First, we want to begin with the end in mind. Now, the ultimate purpose of Catholic education is that integral formation, the religious, intellectual, the development of all human faculties, moral, social awareness, so that our students will live happy, well-ordered lives in this world and enjoy eternity with the Father in the next. These are the highest goods to which we aspire. This doesn't mean we don't aspire to college and career readiness, but they are not the highest goods for Catholic education. Our highest ends, our goals, our purpose, our telos are very, very different from secular education. Therefore, it stands to reason that our ways and our means, that is our curriculum and pedagogy, should look a bit different too. Secondly, the Archbishop wants us to understand that Catholicism is not just a system of doctrinal facts or a set of prayers and liturgies for defined times each week, but it is a comprehensive way of life. We are called to follow Christ in our entire lives. Our faith should really inform all that we do. It should inform the way we look at things, the way we treat people, the way we steward creation. All of this derives from our faith. It also speaks to the fact that our faith, Catholicism, is also its own culture. It's 2,000 years of received wisdom, of thought, of music, art, poetry, prose. This treasure box is the birthright of our students. And we who serve in Catholic education are compelled to pass this birthright on. Thirdly, we should embrace a love for wisdom and a passion for truth. Let's take a look at wisdom. Now, we live in a data-driven age, and wisdom, frankly, is in short supply in some places. We certainly can see that. If you watch the news most nights, you can see that. And it has lost some of its position in our culture. The great poet and playwright T.S. Eliot once said, "Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" So here Eliot is taking a look at our tendency to continually define things down. And wisdom, of course, invites us to gaze back upward. All right, so that's the first principle. Also, we understand wisdom as representing a sort of synthesis of knowledge that illumines a way to understand and know what is good. That's really the ultimate truth of wisdom. Now, truth is understood as something that is not just the objective function of reason, although certainly it has that element too, but it's a mysterious power of faith. Why? Because as Catholics, we understand truth to be not just a concept, but a person, the person of Jesus Christ, who is the way and the truth and the life. Now, this, of course, means we understand, first of all, that there is truth. It can be known by all of us. And in fact, it sort of forms our whole lives into a quest for it. This process, this understanding, this awareness is very freeing. It frees both students and teachers from what Pope Benedict called the dictatorship of relativism, which is this belief that there is not one truth, there are many truths, and it's only how we define it. And you hear this a lot, I think, in our society today. My truth versus your truth. That becomes, sort of a never-ending cycle. We become like hamsters on a wheel. It's exhausting, and it does not free us to be as God created us to be. We also understand on the level of the school that human knowledge is an aspect of this truth to be discovered. So whether we're talking about theological truth, mathematical, scientific, linguistic, literary, in studying these things and studying them according to their own rigor and discipline, we learn little by little, we gain more and more of these pieces of knowledge, which become the truth that coheres ultimately in the person of Jesus Christ. Fourth, the Archbishop asks us to understand what the Church teaches about the nature and essence and purpose of human life. Now, the concept of Christian anthropology is a separate essential mark of the Church, and we could do a whole talk on that, derived from the Church's understanding that the person is made in the image and likeness of God, as a union of body and soul, sexually differentiated, made in and for love. And all of that is true, and all of that informs what we do. But what I'd like to talk about and focus on is an understanding of the dignity of the child, right? Expressed in a curriculum and a pedagogy that respects stages of development, natural curiosity, the importance of wonder, that really works to teach with the grain of the child. And fifth would be an understanding of how the Church views reality, what is around us. Certainly the Church sees a reality that is both natural and supernatural. We only have to take a look at our teaching on the Eucharist to understand this. The Eucharist includes the natural elements of bread and wine, but the supernatural reality of transubstantiation, in which those simple elements become fully the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. And that entirety is what gives us the Eucharist. It's also the understanding that in studying creation, we learn about the Creator. Creation reveals this to us. And all of this is really a mystery that I think God invites all of us to, and really should be something of a hallmark of the way we approach this in schools. So now, having said all of that, I'm going to share my screen and ask everybody to say a little prayer to Saint Isidore. Looking for my talk. All right, hang on, keep those prayers coming. Hang on just a second. Of course, I practiced with it this morning and it was no problem. Let me see why I'm not finding it. Here it is. There we go. Thank you, those of you who prayed. As you can see, this is definitely... All right, here we go. Okay, so taking a look at weaving the Catholic worldview into the texture of our schools, to all that we do. The first is this concept of logocentrism. this Jesus in whom all things cohere. There's two representations here that demonstrate this. First is the quote from Colossians, "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. All things have been created through him and for him." And the accompanying piece of art is called "God is the Architect of the World." Just a beautiful representation of this. So practically speaking, what does this look like? Well, first of all, in thinking about pedagogy, the way that we teach, the way that we reach our students, we want to think about pedagogy that centers on induction, developing an understanding by studying various examples and types that is moving from specific to general, from concrete to abstract, which is basically follows the pattern in which human beings learn all things. But also deduction, where we take a general concept or an abstract idea and come to understand it better by separating out and analyzing its parts. Secondly, a logocentric approach, this concept of Christ as the center in whom all knowledge coheres, is revealed by an integrated curriculum. Now, this is important, and it is a distinction from what we see in modern secular education, which tends to kind of fragment knowledge. We sort of see math as separate from English, as separate from science, as separate from history. And we can sometimes, even see how the school day is organized so that kids kind of move through all of these things. And they may or may not be given a chance to see those connections, but we want to reveal to them that knowledge is inherently connected. And one way to do this, I think that's very powerful, is to work to develop integration in what we call the humanities: history, literature, religion. Religion's a separate note. It always needs to be taught separately in its own discipline, but it should be threaded through, both in terms of maybe Catholic moral teaching, scripture, church history, lives of saints, that impact the study of history and religion. I'll show you an integrated unit in just a moment that seeks to do exactly that. Now, the word logos comes from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. The Word is logos. So we are people of the story. So it's important then for us to be viewing story, salvation, history, for example, as cohesive and comprehensive. Our children in Catholic schools should understand how the world developed from the pre-Christian cultures through scripture, the rise of Christendom, modernity, how this left Europe and came to America, experienced across all cultures, across the globe. And again, threading and integrating into that literature and art, primary sources, music, and architecture. All of this giving a very Catholic, universal concept of whatever it is we're studying with our kids. Now, here's an example of an integrated study. This was it's very much distilled down from how it looks in writing, but an 8th grade teacher at my school many years ago constructed a unit for his students, and the unit was on the nature of freedom. What is freedom? And in thinking about this, first of all, like we always do, we want to begin by drawing from our students what they believe freedom is. And it was rather interesting, as you might expect. The 8th graders started the unit saying, freedom is being able to do what I want. But through this integrated unit, where the teacher presented types and examples of freedom, so founding documents of the United States, they're studying US history, so Declaration of Independence, Federalist Papers, maybe some newspaper editorials. They're also looking at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which does deal with freedom and defines it. They're looking at scriptural passages like Galatians chapter 5, also getting into the understanding of freedom. And then choosing literature. This particular unit, they read I Juan de Pareja, which illumines the nature of human freedom through the experience of someone held as a slave. So here's just one example of threading a Catholic view into a study. It gives students, I think, the fullest understanding. It's interesting, by the end of that unit, while they had started out defining freedom as doing what I want, Most of the eighth graders by the end came to understand that freedom is the opportunity to live in such a way that you can grow and develop to be who God made you to be. And only in studying and discussing and analyzing and writing all of these things could they come to that. If we had told them that in the beginning, it just wouldn't have had any meaning to them. So next we'll take a look at how we thread this church's view of the nature of reality through our programs, this natural and supernatural reality. So first is just the understanding that the natural world is observed and understood really through our senses. So we want to give our students lots of opportunities to observe, to carefully render what they see. I was struck by the connection between teaching children to draw and render carefully. I was very, very struck by how closely that adheres to what we want them to do later in reading and in writing skills. It's a very important fundamental aptitude and a fundamental disposition of both the intellect and the soul. So giving them that chance, the kids understood that, you never really see something until you actually have to draw it. So again, looking for that. Also, a corollary to that is looking for patterns all over, patterns in science, patterns in scripture, math, literature. Many of the Grimm's fairy tales, things happen in threes, for example. This also happens in scripture, looking at numerical sequences, etc. They'll begin to see the nature of reality, and again, also that cohesion. It also means approaching math and science as means to know and understand the world. These subjects are sacred encounters with creation. It's interesting, we're kind of living through a time right now in which there's a heavy focus on STEM subjects, and that's great. The beautiful thing is we can study STEM very, very fully in the Catholic tradition because it is more expansive. So alongside your study of math facts and algorithms, we certainly want them to see the Fibonacci sequence or the beauty of symmetry or sacred geometry, the golden ratio, etc. One of the things that we worked on in my school, trying to figure out how to actually do this when you have to teach them all the other things you have to teach them. And one of the things we came to was to think about, quarterly math projects, or the fact that when you have finished a unit, suppose you finish your unit on long division, then the class period that follows that assessment can be a study of one of these things, can take a departure and take a look at the beauty and the wonder that we find in mathematics. And the same thing really with science. I would say that approaching science in a way that mimics the way science is approached in the real world. Science, of course, is really a method of questioning. So it's all about questioning. It's all about testing, letting them begin with their inquiry, test something, and then learn what principles and science actually undergirds that. Now, another aspect of reality is this concept of the sacramental imagination. And it's really important, I think, in Catholic education that we be as intentional about this as possible. So one example here is this understanding that metaphysical or spiritual properties exist alongside concrete matter. The water of baptism is both a natural element and a spiritual cleansing. Now, I referenced before our understanding of the Eucharist, and as you may be aware, about a year and a half ago, the Pew Research Center came out with a survey that showed a very, very low, only in the 30s% of Catholics who professed belief in the real presence of the Eucharist. Now, there's a lot of possibilities and causes for this. But my sense is that it's not strictly catechetical problem. It may be more related to our taking the time to be sure that our children are brought up and informed in a way that helps them to understand that the world is both natural and supernatural. Think about moving from religion class, where this is being taught to you, that this bread and wine, through the instrumentation of the priest, becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. And, at the same time, then maybe going to science class and reading something authored by someone who would deny this, who might say to kids, well, only things that can be observed and measured can be called true. So you see where things begin to be in conflict. The beautiful thing about the church's understanding is that it understands theological questions and scientific questions answer two different things, but they both belong together, with theology, of course, the queen. So I would just mention that as an important part of our catechesis. Another teacher that I observed did a wonderful lesson on the parable of the sower while he was teaching the unit on seeds and planting. And brilliant, because children understand the truth of that parable better, and they actually understand the science and process of plant growth by looking at it from another direction as well. Now, it's interesting about the word imagination. Imagination in our times has come to sort of mean something I made up, something that didn't exist and I made it up in my mind. But in fact, the word really derives from this ability to faithfully image reality. Okay, through observation, rendering, sorting, classifying, etc. But it's that ability to know and see what is around us. So if we want to develop imagination in our children, we want to choose literature that faithfully images that reality. Okay, there's a reason, for example, that the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis do this better than Harry Potter, although I think Harry Potter is fun and kids love it, and I understand completely why they want to read it. And I was certainly grateful to see well-written children's literature after a long desert. But the Chronicles of Narnia image reality closer to the way the church understands it, right? To elements of good and evil, of sin and redemption, of sacrifice, of friendship and relationship. Okay, the nature of time, even the nature of eternity. Likewise, we would want to look at Grimm's Cinderella rather than the Disney version. Grimm's Cinderella, there's a great deal of emphasis placed on virtue. There's quite a lot of prayer, things happening in threes, natural elements that represent supernatural realities, etc. So the intentional development of sacramental imagination is important in understanding reality. Now, moving to that nature and essence of the human person, that respect for the dignity of the child, especially through developments, begins with acknowledging something that really began with Aristotle, who said, man by nature desires to know. So it's innate in all of us. We have a natural curiosity. I once read something that the average 4-year-old asks something like 300 questions a day. And if you're around 4-year-olds, you know that may even be too low an estimate. But they have a natural desire to know. And it's that desire that we want to stir into flame through the educational process. Similarly, wisdom begins in wonder. So that development, that movement towards synthesizing knowledge starts with being able to wonder about things. So giving our students the opportunity to stand back and to wonder. Thirdly, we want to work to develop what is most human in our children, those human faculties of wonder and memory and imagination and love and exuberance, contemplation and reason. All of these things are what is most human. And this is why we want to seek materials and pedagogy that do this. Certainly, there are any number of products that might be more efficient and maybe arrive at something more quickly. But I would argue that the time spent developing these human faculties is really critical for the development of each one of those children, and also to restore something important back to the culture. A fourth principle of this is imitation before invention. And this is really important. This goes back to an understanding of human nature in terms of how we learn things. We are natural mimics. We all know this. Children learn to speak by mimicking, and sometimes they say things in mimicking us that we wish they hadn't, because we wish we hadn't said it in the first place, because it'll come out clear as a bell when you least want it to. But the reality is that children learn by imitating. So giving them the opportunity to study and imitate something before they're called to create it on their own is really important. It also points to the way, for example, the great painters, the great masters of art worked. Michelangelo didn't just sit down at a canvas and become brilliant. He carefully studied technique and brushstroke of all of the masters who had come before him. And the same should be true as we approach writing, as we approach literature and art, music, all of those things. Lots of opportunities to imitate, to learn those techniques before there's invention. And the last principle really comes to us from Dr. Maria Montessori, which is play is the work of the child. I think this is so critically important, especially for elementary school, which is we shouldn't look at play as a break from learning or something extra, or we'll get to it if we have time, but rather as being essential, because the developing child, there's a synergy between physical activity and intellectual growth and power. And so, when you see a child standing at the water table and they're filling something and noticing that if it's full, it sinks, and if it's empty, it floats, they're actually having a physics lesson, all right, what may look like play. So it's important, I think, to keep play central in the life of the classroom. Now, I'm taking a little departure here to share something that's just very beautiful. The School of Athens and the Disputation of the Holy Sacrament. These are frescoes painted by Raphael. They are in the Vatican Museum. A dear friend and colleague of mine traveled to the Vatican and came back and said, so excited. And she said, you won't believe it. It's like all of a sudden it clicked. I understood completely the essence of faith and reason as they exist in the Catholic tradition. Our Holy Father, Pope St. John Paul II, called faith and reason the two wings on which the human spirit soars, and that this is the means to the contemplation of truth, which is ultimately the contemplation of God, and really the only way we can fully understand ourselves. So these two paintings really do depict that. The one on the left is the School of Athens, and this is a painting that shows all of the great mathematicians, philosophers, scientists of the ancient world. They're gathered together in a place, in a structure, to discuss, to share their discoveries and their ideas. At the center, you see Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle's on the right, Plato is on the left. Now, you'll note that Aristotle is pointing downward, while Plato appears to point upward. This speaks to their differing philosophies. Elements of each of these philosophies, though, have been woven in to Christianity. Plato's pointing up to signify his understanding that the changing world around us is a mere shadow of a higher, truer, and unchanging reality yet to come. While Aristotle points down because he understood reality as what could be experienced, observed, and touched, and known through the senses. He's holding his book called Ethics, which compiles his thought on relationships, justice, friendship, government. You also see a little harder to see in the painting, but you will see Pythagoras and Ptolemy, both having studied the world, the movement of the planets, also understanding a cosmic harmony that underscores all the mathematical laws that govern it. So this particular fresco is on one wall, the Vatican Museum, and opposite it is the second piece, which is the Disputation of the Holy Sacrament. Now, here, the theologians themselves are not placed in a structure, but they actually form the structure themselves. They form one body, if you will, flanking the Holy Trinity and Christ present in the Eucharist. Jesus Christ, then, is the full revelation of truth. The figures in the School of Athens moving toward this, it almost looks as if they're walking towards this when you see them together in the Vatican. But again, that expression of the desire for truth and using reason, but seeing the fullness of it, the true fulfillment and revelation in faith. The ancients believed that there was truth and they sought it. The truth here is found finally in a person, not just a concept, as I said before. So this is just a beautiful encapsulation of the church's understanding of education, frankly. Now, the great thing about approaching this through faith and reason is it stirs in all of us the great questions that we have, and it helps us working with our students to find answers to them. Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? Why is there evil? What is after this life? These are the great questions that cannot be fully answered by one or the other. They require really both, and that's one of the great distinctions of Catholic education. An example of this, a great example of this from history, is Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. This is really a primer on faith and reason, in which Dr. King places the entire civil rights movement in the church's intellectual tradition. He draws on Socrates, St. Paul, and Thomas Aquinas' teaching on moral law to provide a compelling argument for equal and civil rights in this country. So it's just an amazing way to look and see the fullness of faith and reason. This is a great quote from Sir Isaac Newton. Gravity explains the motion of the planets, but it cannot explain who sets the planets in motion. So again, for an integral formation of the whole person, we need both. I'm going to end with just some questions for reflection. This comes from St. Jerome, where I was principal, but they're just good guiding questions. Is it beautiful? Is it excellent? Does it demand the best students and teachers have to offer? Does it encourage reverence for the mystery of God and the splendor of his creation? Does it encourage reverence for the mystery of the human person and respect for the student's own human dignity? Does it encourage him or her to desire truth? Does it assist in passing on the received wisdom of the church's tradition? Does it inspire real searching and thinking? Does it provoke the student to ask why? Does it develop to the fullest extent what is uniquely human in our students? The powers of attending, deliberating, questioning, calculating, remembering, loving. Does it encourage the student to become patient, to take time, and if necessary, to start over in order to achieve excellence, or does it subordinate excellence to speed, ease, and efficiency? And 10th and final, does it aim to develop wisdom to know the good and virtue to do the good? Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop the share and check out the chat feature. Fibonacci sequence specifically. Yes, I can definitely provide you some resources. The beautiful thing about the Fibonacci sequence is it's like an example of God's thumbprint all over creation. It's both numerical, the sum of the previous two numbers being the third number, but it's evident in the arrangement of petals of a flower, a mollusk shell, even the curved spine of an unborn child. So yes, I will definitely be happy to follow up with NCEA and look for some resources. All right, anything else? Just about 5 minutes to go. No? Well, I think what I will do, I see B on the chat, maybe we can talk at some point offline about sharing some resources with schools to assist with that. But otherwise, not seeing any other questions. Well, we will go ahead and conclude. Everyone always loves a few extra minutes to grab that cup of coffee before the next session. So thank you again. Thank you for having me and for spending this time, and wishing you all a very happy Easter and a wonderful rest of your conference. Thank you.